I've been in the Air Force for 13 years now. My wife Erica and I have been married for almost 25 years. It'll be 25 years in February. And I waited for about 18 months, not a long time, but about 18 months before we had our first child. Paige is my oldest daughter. She's 23 now and married. And then I have a 21-year-old son, Josiah, who was shortly after her. And then at the time I was working on my master's degree in seminary when my wife got pregnant with our third son. His name was Isaac. The pregnancy with Isaac was different. There was obviously something that just wasn't quite right. But this was in 2001. And it was before there were a lot of options for prenatal testing. But eventually, October 3rd of 2001, we welcomed Isaac into the world. Everything seemed to be fine. We brought him home from the hospital in a regular amount of time, just as we had, which back then was like 3 days. My goal, I remember then, 20 years ago now, was just to be there for my wife and help out with the 2 other kids. But something was different with Isaac. He would sleep a lot. It was difficult to wake him up. In fact, whenever it came time to feed him, I would have to help my wife wake him up. We would undress him. We'd oftentimes take his diaper off of him, tickle his feet, do everything we could so that my wife could feed him. It was about, I don't actually know I don't remember the time, but it was probably 2:30 in the morning when my wife woke up. And she said, "He's not breathing." At first, I didn't believe it. I remember, I quickly turned the light on, and I was certain he was just in a deep sleep. We called 911, and the operator did what you see and you know happens. They walked me through all the steps to take. I started performing CPR, and it seemed like an eternity while we waited on the ambulance. In reality, I know it was only a couple of minutes, but it felt like ages. They finally got there, and the sheriff, it was a sheriff's deputy too, I remember, and they pulled us out of our bedroom, and the 4 of us were taken to the back bathroom in our upstairs. And the deputy sheriff stood in the bathroom with us with the door closed while the paramedics worked on it. I remember sitting in the emergency room, and keep in mind, I'm a young pastor at this point, and I've grown up in church, grown up with a strong faith. And I remember sitting there and my wife saying to me, it'll be okay. We just have to pray. I also remember thinking this can't actually be happening. Eventually the doctors came and they took us down the hallway to a small chapel, of all places. They sat us down in a pew, and they told us it was too late. There was nothing they'd been able to do. I remember the feeling that I've seen in so many others in that moment, just this grief that overcame my body and just collapsing. They took us a few minutes later into the emergency room area, and they let me hold him. And I remember never wanting to let go of him. The next days and weeks could only be described as horrific. Pain that a parent goes through in losing a child is one that is incomprehensible. We all expect someday to bury our parents. There's just a natural order of things. We all prepare for that. And when we get married, We expect that we're probably going to end up, one of us is going to end up burying the spouse at some point in our lives. But no one ever can prepare for bearing a child. My wife and I knew as much as there were times where we didn't want to go on living, especially in the first few weeks. Times when I remember my wife and I saying it would be just easier if we turned the wheel and ran off a bridge. But you couldn't do that, and we couldn't do that because we had 2 other children. And it was those other 2 kids that we knew we had to live for. In the autopsy of our son Isaac, they discovered that our son's brain was actually twice as heavy as it should have been. And the only thing they could say was that there was a potential neurological disorder that they hadn't detected. We didn't know if that was something that we had created. There was a problem that we had that we would pass down to another child. Our first 2 children didn't have this. So the fear of potentially doing that again and having to relive this horror was something we weren't sure we could ever face or overcome. We had a chance to donate our son's heart valves. And one of his heart valves was actually used to save the life of another young lady. I wish I knew who she was. We never had the opportunity to meet her or hear who she was. I know where the hospital was, but it gives me a lot of comfort to know that out there there's a girl who's 20 years old now, who has my son's heart valve. It took me a couple of years, at least a couple of years, for my faith to be, I wouldn't say healed, but to be changed. I used to ask myself, why me? And I think a lot of people do when they go through hardships. Got to the point where I realized that suffering is no discriminator of persons. It became more of the question of why not me? I'm no different than anyone else. And my worldview changed as a result of these questions I was asking myself, and the way that I viewed the world around me and suffering and the problem of evil. Fast forward a few years, over the next couple of years actually, when we got married, we had wanted a lot of kids. It was kind of our dream, and wanted to be parents. But the thought of potentially losing another child was crippling. The fear that ensued was something we couldn't overcome. And then in 2005, we both decided that we were ready to go ahead and risk having another child. In February 2006, our son Benjamin was born, and apart from a minor scare in the hospital with a heart valve that didn't open quite right and quickly corrected itself, Benjamin was healthy. In 2008, our daughter Claire came along, and she was a surprise. We had not planned on her. After our daughter Claire came along in 2008, I was convinced we were done. And we didn't plan on anymore, but God had put this calling, I now know, on our lives to take care of kids. And when we first considered adoption, we considered adoption because we didn't dare to have another child. It was an alternative to having another child. But over the years, it seemed that repeatedly there kept on being instances of being prodded again. I continued to dismiss it for years because I didn't want to start over again. But I couldn't get away from this nagging sense that we were supposed to be involved in taking care of orphans. So finally, in between 2018 and 2019, while we were in the DC area, I listened to a podcast. It was a message. I didn't mean to tune it in. I was just flipping through podcasts, and it was a message about adoption. And that Sunday in church, our preacher talked about adoption. And my wife finally, she nudged me and she said, "Are you ready yet?" And I finally had to say yes. I can say that I didn't want to pursue it, but I knew I was supposed to pursue it. And the amazing thing is, after I surrendered my will, in exchange for that, I received a new heart and for it, and a compassion and a level of excitement about taking care of orphans. So in the beginning of July, following a couple of months of looking to adopt a child and not finding the right situation, my wife finally said to me, "Would you take a baby?" I told her she was crazy. I'm 45 now. I didn't want to start over with another baby, but I couldn't think of any good reason to say no other than selfish reasons. And so on June 30th, a little boy was born here in San Antonio. He was born addicted to drugs, and we brought him home on July 4th or 5th from the hospital, and currently it looks as if we're going to be adopting him soon. So to go from 20 years ago having lost a child to now having a brand new baby, and going through medical issues with him, and yet knowing that we faced probably one of the hardest things we could ever face, and we did it together. I don't live with that same fear that I used to have. The 7 years or so before I joined the Air Force, following my son's loss, we began to experience a sense of compassion for others that I hadn't had before. That desire in us to meet those needs expanded our perspective on the world around us. It changed how we saw people. It changed how we saw families, communities, and it also, I would say, set me on a search. As a pastor, I really believe that it was the circumstances that God chose to use in my life. And in 2008, I had the opportunity to join the Air National Guard. And so we decided to go ahead and I would join the Air National Guard and do this part-time. What I didn't know is that what the chaplaincy would afford me was the opportunity to connect with that compassion that I felt this calling to live out and to care, I guess is the best way to say, about other people in a way that I couldn't even do in the church. And within a year, I knew that this is what I had to do full time. And so we joined active duty in 2011, and for the past 10 years, the opportunities the Air Force has afforded me to lean into this calling and to demonstrate compassion to others have been remarkable. As chaplains in particular, chaplains hear a lot. As those who wear the uniform know, or should know, we have 100% confidentiality. That means that we can be told anything. And along with that goes a burden we carry, because we hear things, we hear secrets that no one else wants to tell anyone. There's darkness that's brought to us. So yeah, there are good days and there are bad days, and there are times when the pain that I bear still, it comes back to the surface ever so often, is brought forth by an experience of someone else's. There have been a couple of times throughout my chaplaincy career so far, where I've been with families that have lost children, and it brings those memories back to the surface again. So those are hard days. In the Air Force, I think that there are resources, I know there are resources that we have available to us. Military One Source is a great location. that I will direct families to. In addition to that, their spouses network in their own squadrons and in their own groups. The biggest thing I would say to family members is to lean into the social network that's around you. There's a strength and a brotherhood and sisterhood in not only in uniform, but among our family members that you don't find anywhere else. And so I'll encourage them to do that. Chaplains are always a fantastic resource. Our mental health professionals are amazing. Our MFLEX, military family life consultants, just tremendous. There's so many resources available to families that are hurting that it's incredible. When I walk with a family now that goes through a hardship and through a tragic loss, to see the way that we as an Air Force family surround them and take care of everything, it's remarkable. And thankfully, we had some wonderful people that surrounded us in the civilian world when we lost our son. But I can tell you that I've seen many more instances in the civilian world where that was not the case. And yet, more often than not in the military, that has been the case. And I'm really grateful for that.